Listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar entitled Predictors of Postsecondary Success, Tools Focused on Postsecondary Enrollment and Completion, co-sponsored by the College and Career Readiness and Success Center at AIR and the American Youth Policy Forum. My name is Jennifer Brown-Lerner, and I will serve as today's moderator. First, a few logistical points. In the event of any technical difficulties, you may dial 1-800-263-6317 to reach GoToWebinar's technical support line. Also, if you happen to lose connectivity during the webinar, please go ahead and log back in. At any point during the webinar, you may type your questions for our presenters into the question box on your screen indicated here. We will do our best to answer all of them during the webinar. In addition, we'll be live tweeting today's webinar and encourage you to do the same using the hashtag #PredictSuccess. Finally, please note that the slides and a recording of today's webinar will be available both on the CCRS Center website and the AYPF website. For those of you new to our webinar series, the College and Career Readiness and Success Center, which is housed at the American Institutes of Research, is part of a network of federally funded comprehensive centers that provide technical assistance and resources to our regional partners and states on key educational reform issues. The American Youth Policy Forum, our co-host, is a lead partner in the CCRS Center. As a CCRS Center technical assistance hub, we collaborate with federal and external centers and resource providers to promote knowledge development, dissemination, and application through technology-based activities such as today's webinar. We invite you to visit our website to access a copy of this webinar, including today's PowerPoint slides and other resources that may be of interest to you and your colleagues. I'm going to briefly introduce today's presenters in the order that they're going to speak. We are going to pause throughout the webinar to have an opportunity to ask our panelists your questions. Please note that their contact information, PowerPoint slides will be posted online at www.aypf.org and www.ccrscenter.org following today's presentation. First, we will hear from Becky Smerdon, who is president of Quill Research Associates and also serves as the Deputy Director of Knowledge Development for the College and Career Readiness and Success Center. She is the co-author of the brief Predictors of Postsecondary Success, which will be discussed in today's webinar. Next, we will hear from MorraLee Keller, who serves as Director of Technical Assistance for the National College Access Network, or NCAN. She will describe the development of NCAN's Common Measures Toolkit. She will be followed by Bill DeBaun, a Program Analyst at NCAN, who will be joining us to discuss the use of common measures at a range of programs across the country. Finally, we will hear from June Giddings, Post-Secondary Coach and Gulf Coast Partners Achieving Student Success, or GC-PASS, Program Coordinator at Houston A+ Challenge. She will be discussing the use of common measures across a number of partners involved in GC-PASS. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Becky.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to share our work. As Jennifer mentioned, we put out a brief called Predictors of Postsecondary Success, and the purpose of the brief was to provide states, districts, and school personnel seeking support to determine whether their students are on a path to post-secondary success. In this work, we've reviewed well over 100 research studies across the K-20 spectrum to identify predictors of post-secondary success. Next slide, please. Just a few minutes to give you a brief overview of the brief, and then I'll talk about some of the highlights. As I mentioned, we really did kind of a pre-K to 20 spectrum, and we divided up the measures according to different educational levels, starting with early childhood all the way to post-secondary. We also divided the measures into 3 types. The first are indicators, and those are measures with an established threshold. So, for example, A GPA, a 3.0 GPA is correlated with, in elementary school, is correlated with a higher GPA in middle school, or absent 10% or more of the time is correlated with not graduating high school, as examples. So they're distinct kind of cutoffs. Predictors are really just measures that are strongly correlated with a later outcome. So more absenteeism is not a particular number, but more absenteeism is related to lower grades later on. And then other factors are really kind of measures or concepts that have really sound theory behind them, but kind of lack reliable metrics. So there's a lot of research, theoretical and certainly some empirical, that looks at issues such as social emotional learning, and they found some, relationship to the success. So we really divided into three measures just to help folks kind of wrap their heads around the different types of measures that we found. I want to throw in one caveat, and that is that we originally started this work thinking we wanted to find, predictors of post-secondary success, so that we would find, measures in early childhood and elementary school, et cetera, that all predicted something such as graduating college or getting through your first year of college without remediation. And what we found is that, when you got down to kind of younger years, elementary and early ed in particular, there really wasn't data and nor studies that really kind of tracked that trajectory. So what we ended up doing was finding measures at different grade levels that were predictors of success at the next grade level. So I just wanted to throw that caveat in there as well. Okay, next slide, please. I'm just going to go through some of the highlights at kind of each level, and then talk about some of the recommendations. So what you'll see here is we start with early childhood, and we did not find any indicators, established thresholds on measures for early childhood to predict later educational success. We did find some predictors, particularly around early approaches to learning, participating in early child care, and around an index called a school readiness risk profile, and that included things such as persistence, emotional regulation, physical health, etc. There are also a list of other potential factors, and again, these are things where there's either strong theory or certainly some research, but not kind of consistent research with kind of well-established, reliable metrics. And so here you'll see a lot of social emotional learning, attention span, persistence, etc., all believed in certainly some level of research behind them that suggests that they are important for later success. Next slide, please. Moving into elementary, we did find a couple of indicators. So reading by third grade, being proficient on a third grade reading test is associated with proficiency on such tests in middle grades. Also absenteeism, that less than 10% absenteeism typically resulted or is correlated with higher grades in middle school. There are also some predictors here around attention span and some social skills ratings, and then kind of the other potential factors include things that are a little bit tougher to measure, and in this case it's social competence. Okay, next slide, please. Racing right along, I'm doing kind of pre-K through post-secondary in less than 10 minutes, so forgive the speed here. As we get to middle school, you'll see that there are more indicators. We're getting a little bit closer, to a more proximal outcome of post-secondary. So we see more indicators here and certainly more research that's kind of flagging, creating flags and indicators for future success. So here you'll see absenteeism again. It's a common theme. You'll also see that in high school. There's some issues around mobility. Staying in the same school is valuable. Passing courses, passing Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and then certainly some test scores on tests that happen in the middle grades. Around predictors, you'll see coursework, taking rigorous coursework in middle grades predicts high school success. Also, you may have seen or heard of this notion of grit, which is sort of a combination of concepts that kind of gets at focus, interest, commitment, follow through, et cetera. And there's a little bit of research that suggests that kids that have more grit may have a higher GPA later on. And then again, you'll see social emotional decision-making skills under other potential factors. Okay, next, we're moving into secondary. And here, I think this table goes on for 2 pages, but here you'll see, again, a lot more indicators because we're getting a lot closer to post-secondary, and also seeing, a lot more research kind of predicting high school to post-secondary outcomes. Absenteeism, you'll see many of the kind of early warning signal indicators, which you may have heard of and been familiar with, the Chicago Consortium's work and others. You certainly see some course sequencing here, GPA, and then certainly some test scores. Under predictor, you see a little bit of testing and transferring from time to time, and then again, more of kind of the social emotional types of work, and then certainly some of the work keys and a little bit of certification and kind of work testing, kind of career testing, going under other potential factors. Next slide, I think that might be just more secondary. Yeah, nope, we go right into post-secondary. And here we had a difficult time finding research here. Definitely had a lot more in the middle school and high school levels. But here we were looking at, again, indicators. You'll see kind of early completion and doing well, kind of early post-secondary often predicts how you'll do later on in your post-secondary. So, completing getting 15 credits in your first quarter, more likely to persist in post-secondary as an example. Predictors, again, we're seeing issues around immediate enrollment after graduation, more likely to persist. Working fewer than 15 hours, more likely to persist, and then having some type of extracurricular activity. And then we just kind of have, in this other category, we've done a little bit of research that talked about this notion of vocational intent and actually being intentional in terms of what you're attending post-secondary for and what you're seeking for your career. Next slide, please. Based on this work, we kind of came up with three recommendations to move forward. The first is really kind of, and I'm sure you've heard this over and over again, but continuing to really build data systems that really go from, little kids all the way up to workforce in order to be able to identify kind of these indicators of success along the way so that you're able to then, find and tag students and identify those who are struggling and those who are not, to then use that information and intervene. The next recommendation, next slide please, is that it's really important, and what we saw in the research is it's really important to develop valid measures and to test them out and to determine the extent to which they work for all subgroups, the context that you're in, et cetera. A certain cutoff, for example, for absenteeism, or a certain cutoff for grades or behavior, it may vary from, say, an urban school district to a rural school district, or one urban to another urban school district. A lot of it depends on policies and, certainly a lot of kind of local contextual issues. So it's important to really be testing and using these measures in your own context rather than just adopting kind of the indicators that have come from the research. And then finally, next slide, please. As I mentioned kind of in the first recommendation, that sort of the whole point that I think it's important to really have and spend time on developing these indicators is that they can really be integrated into a data system that can be used to identify kids early, third grade, and earlier than that, certainly, pre-K to get a sense of, which kids are going to kind of be struggling as they move through the pipeline, be able to identify those kids, dig deeper, introduce some appropriate interventions, and then continue to look at their trajectory to evaluate the effectiveness of those interventions. So I will stop there, and thank you again for the time to present. There's a lot more information and a ton of citations in the brief, and certainly if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them when Jennifer says the time is right. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. That was a great presentation. And just a reminder to our audience that this brief can be found on the CCRS Center website at www.ccrscenter.org. And Becky, before we transition, we've had lots of questions asking for clarification between predictors, indicators, and other factors. So do you mind just doing that one more time before we transition on?
Sure. So indicators, when we found research that gave a particular number or value on a measure to pay attention to, we called those indicators. So for example, if someone was looking at the relationship between high school attendance and high school graduation, or ninth grade attendance and high school graduation, if we found a study that said if you're absent 10 or more days or 10% or more of the time, we called that an indicator because it gave a value, a flag for which to watch for. So, look for kids who are absent 10% or 10 days or whatever that number is. If they're absent more than that, then, flag them as, needing additional support or being in trouble. A predictor is if someone just looked at attendance, they didn't indicate how many how many absences were an issue, but they just did a study and they correlated, the more times you're absent, the lower, the less your chances are of graduating high school, then that would be a predictor because they didn't give a hard and fast number to say, here's the flag, here's the tipping point, this is what you watch for. And then other factors are really what I would call sort of, in some cases, it's more theoretical research. In other cases, it's a little kind of, it's not necessarily rigorous research, and or some of it is kind of developing surveys and measures to try to get at some of these issues or some of these concepts like social emotional learning, et cetera. But that there wasn't kind of a common instrument or tool that was being used, and there weren't always consistent findings. So in that case, we wanted to recognize both that research and those concepts because they certainly do seem to matter, and we would not argue that they don't matter, but we wanted to sort of put them in a little different category. They definitely need kind of more research and more work to be able to be, in my mind, actionable.
Great, thanks. And so now we're going to transition right on to our next presenter, MorraLee Keller of the National College Access Network. MorraLee?
Yes, good afternoon, Jennifer. Thank you. First of all, let me, on behalf of NCAN, thank CCRS and AYPF for inviting NCAN to participate in the webinar this afternoon to talk about our work around the area that we call common measures. I'll be the first to let you know that we use the word measures probably as a little bit of a mix or a generic term for the predictors and indicators that Becky was talking about. Just to give you a brief background about common measures and how it came about, NCAN was doing some work and was getting a lot of requests from our college access programs across the country as it related to data, wanting to know, what type of data should we be tracking, what are the best, measures out there that will let us know if our students are on track to post-secondary or for completing post-secondary. So our background work, which was actually sort of being done probably fairly simultaneously with the background work about that was being done for the brief, we probably read many of the same research projects. We reviewed lots and lots of research so that we could come up with some measures. And trust me, the list could be longer than what you'll see today because there are lots of different types of indicators and predictors. But the reason that this project was named Common Measures, when we took a look at what a lot of our members around the country were measuring, taking a look at other college access programs, federal programs, and things like that, what everybody was measuring, and then trying to find the research that would back it up. This is the list after being vetted through many of our members that we shortened it to so that our members could have a framework when it comes to their data. So next slide, please. And when our programs are looking at managing data, there's a lot of different reasons. They're looking probably for feedback on their own program. Oftentimes the data, if they are analyzing it, can let them know if there's enhancement needed to their services, perhaps what the utilization rate is for their services, or how effective the services are that they're providing to the clientele in their program. Taking a look at data can also help you identify service gaps, you know, whether there's an area that you're not addressing or if there happens to be a subpopulation that needs to have some additional services. Obviously, lots of our programs need to report back to stakeholders or administrators. A lot of our college access programs are serving particular school districts, geographic areas, and things like that. Also critical for us managing data is reporting back to the resource providers. Lots of college access programs are operating under the nonprofit umbrella and therefore seek a lot of resources from foundations, etc., and are going to need to provide effective feedback to them. And then also just to do internal or perhaps have an external evaluation done for your program. All great reasons for managing your data. Next slide, please. When it comes on down to which kind of data to track, programs will have sort of different types of reasons and that they need to track data. It may be the data they're tracking is based on the specific goals and objectives or mission of their particular program, so that may drive data that they need to track. They need to figure out if they're providing access services or maybe access and success services. It'll let them know certain elements that they should be tracking. Sometimes you're tracking data because you promised it in a grant, that there would be certain key things that you may measure and provide feedback based on a grant that you received. Lots of times, though, just so you understand, a lot of the data that college access programs need to get will come from other sources, and so there may be the need to develop data sharing agreements with school districts or other data sources. So that oftentimes is a conversation when you begin to look at these elements and discover the sources of the data. Next slide, please. When we take a look at the types of data that we're suggesting to our programs to track, if they're providing access services, we're suggesting, and we'll see the specific measure shortly here, but we suggest that they track things in an academic area, testing area, admissions, financial aid, and then if there is specific program data or state-specific data they need to track. When it comes to success data, as we move programs that are working to move students towards degree attainment, they need to look at the pre-enrollment data, enrollment patterns, academic, persistence, and financial aid. All of the data that we're tracking also needs to be able to be broken down by different demographic categories. So we think it's important that obviously you have all the demographic information about the clientele that you're serving. Next slide, please. For our college access programs, there are usually two primary outcomes that all these measures are driving towards. For access services, they're driving towards the percentage of students that you can get to enroll in post-secondary education. And on the success side of the equation, the number of students that you can help move towards degree attainment. As we developed this for our college access programs, we realized that a lot of these elements that you'll see and this set of measures may be very applicable to school districts who are wanting to track the outcomes for the particular students that come through their district. So we believe this kind of has multiple applications if you choose to sort of make some accommodations as you read through these. Next slide, please. The academic indicators, just know that the primary source for these oftentimes will be the school districts when you see the elements on the next slide. I mentioned the data sharing agreements, and to track a lot of this type of data, you may need to make some modifications to the tracking system. Your college access programs, depending on what they're using, may need to add some fields, modify some fields. Also, if this is being done from a school district perspective, there may be some modifications needed in your student tracking system so that you can monitor these. Next slide, please. We'll take a look at the academic indicators. We broke our indicators into essential and if available. Ideally, I'd like to tell you that we mean all of them are essential, but if for some reason your ability to track data is limited, the ones in the essential category, we would strongly recommend that you be monitoring those. Please remember this is a program dashboard, and so when you read these indicators, this would be helping you try to inform your work as a program. This is not necessarily an individual student dashboard. In the academic indicators, taking a look at the percentage of students who are on track to completing either Common Core or a rigorous curriculum as defined by the state they're in, or perhaps even if this is being used by a district, they can make the definition for what they're going to use as a rigorous curriculum. Also available, taking a look at the percentage of students enrolled in AP courses, scoring 3 or better on AP tests, percentage of students enrolled in dual credit, percentage of students with Algebra 2 mastery, which would be defined as C or higher, taking a look at the average high school GPA, and the percentage of the students that you're serving that graduate on time. These will all be fairly solid measures that students or in your program, the higher the percentages here, are probably on track to post-secondary enrollment. Next slide, please. The testing indicators, we're very lucky that our national sources, College Board and ACT, provide a lot of good reports to the district so that you can have some comparison of how a particular district or your particular program does compared to the state and compared to the national averages. So obviously essential ones, taking a look at the percentage of your students who are taking the SAT and the ACT. Also, if available, taking a look at the percentage of students who are taking the PSAT and plan. And then, of course, taking a look at the percentage of students who are meeting or exceeding the national college readiness benchmarks associated with those particular tests. Next slide, please. The admissions indicators, taking a look at the percentage of students completing college admissions applications by school type. If available, the average number of applications completed per student, the percentage of students visiting a college campus that they applied to, and the percentage of students accepted into at least one higher education institution. Many of our students, sometimes in the college access programs, complete an application for college, but something happens or there becomes a hurdle along the way, and they never sometimes get to the position of being accepted into an institution. So, you know, obviously critical that programs monitor that to make sure that students are getting all the way through the process to the point of being admitted. Next slide, please. When we talk about financial aid indicators, obviously essential percentage of students who complete and submit a FAFSA form, but also under essential percentage of students awarded financial aid. This again deals with roadblocks and hurdles that some of our students or lots of our students may get their FAFSAs filed, but they'll run into hurdles along the way. For example, the verification process or other documents that need submitted that may prevent them from getting to the point where their financial aid is actually awarded and available to be placed into their accounts. So while filing a FAFSA is absolutely critical, we do also need to make sure that our students get to the point of their aid being awarded. Also taking a look at additional indicators, the amount of total financial aid awarded by student and by aid type, and taking a look at the percentage of students that complete supplementary scholarship applications will be a good indicator or predictor of their likelihood of enrolling in post-secondary. Next slide, please. When we take a look at success indicators, many of our programs work on the access side of the bridge, and then also as their students enroll in post-secondary, they continue their work as they try to make sure that those students are moving towards degree attainment. There were a few items that you would have noticed in the access indicators in which might have been required to be in what we would call a student self-reported category, where students may have to notify you about colleges that they visited or the number of outside scholarship applications they completed. There are some more indicators or measures in the success side that also might require some student self-reported data. Also, sometimes we'll define self-reported as the student may need to supply you with the documentation regarding one of the measures. So it's not, in a sense, purely self-reported. It's just that the student would be required to permit or submit documentation. And oftentimes, for these success indicators, a fair number of these, some information is going to be needed from higher education institutions, so it's critical for our programs to make sure that their participating students have signed the appropriate informational releases so that there can be access to the information that you need for these particular indicators. Next slide, please. When we take a look at the pre-enrollment category, taking a look at the percentage of students who participate in college orientation programs or the percentage of students participating in summer bridge programs, these can be some measures about the likelihood of degree attainment. Again, some of these may need to be in the self-reported category. Summer bridge programs also can have different definitions at different higher ed institutions. Some may be academic related, some may be have some type of particular major that they're associated with or things like that. In enrollment, the percentage of students who enroll within 6 months of high school graduation and the student enrollment by institution type and status, taking a look at students if they're enrolling on a full-time or a part-time basis. In addition, also taking a look at the percentage of students who enroll within 12 months of high school graduation. Those enrolling within 12 still have a very good chance of degree attainment compared to those students who wait beyond the 12-month benchmark. Next slide, please. In terms of academic indicators at the post-secondary level, critical to look at the percentage of students that you're working with that were placed into remedial courses. Here's the one time when we are looking for lower percentages, and that will be a better measure in terms of who's likely to attain their degree. Also, if available, taking a look at your students completing remedial coursework within an academic year, percentage of students completing a college level math course, and that would be a non-remedial math course. The percentage of courses attempted compared to courses successfully completed can be an indicator of degree attainment. The percentage of students who complete more than 20 credit hours in their first academic year, and taking a look at their GPA are good measures in terms of who's moving towards degree attainment. Next slide, please. When it looks at persistence indicators, of course, the year-to-year student persistence rate for your students, and if available, looking at term-to-term. If you've got students enrolling in community colleges, term-to-term can be as critical as year-to-year persistence rate. And also taking a look at the percentage of students transferring from 2- to 4-year programs with or without associate degrees. Also, from the college access perspective, many programs oftentimes find students who begin at 4-year institutions and then transfer to 2-year institutions. Oftentimes for college access programs, they'll consider that a win as long as the student is persisting at an institution, whether they've switched 2 to 4 or 4 to 2. Next slide, please. The financial aid indicators, again, critical, same as the access, getting the FAFSA submitted, but also getting to the point of getting the financial aid awarded, as those same hurdles can crop up since the financial aid process is an annual one. Also, if available, looking at the amount of financial aid awarded, both the total and per student, and also taking a look at the percentage of students working greater than 20 hours per week. Just a comment here that that's a good indicator about post-secondary completion if they tend to work 20 hours or less. Oftentimes there can be a little wiggle room in that depending on if the location of the work is on their campus or off campus. So next please, next slide. When we take a look at the demographics, here are the categories that we suggest that our programs have about the students, understanding whether these are first-generation students. If they're on the access side of the world, are they free and reduced lunch eligible students? Once they've entered post-secondary, the income indicator we'll use will be Pell Grant eligible, race and gender, and then English as a second language status. It's really critical to be able to take all these indicators, any of the ones that you're electing to track, and then be able to break them down into the different demographic groups so that you can understand whether there's uniform performance across all these subpopulations, or once you take a look at the measures that you're using, do you find that some of your subpopulations are just not functioning, or you're not seeing the same percentages and numbers for particular subpopulations. Again, that can help inform your work and let you know that you may need to be adjusting some of the services or programming that you're providing to students. Next slide, please. The research support, Jennifer is sharing the website and where you can find our college access and college success common measures. The research that we reviewed, we tried to find broad research studies that would support the general concepts associated with these common measures. So if you go to our website and download that document, you'll be able to see the research studies that we associated with each of the measures that we found. There's many more out there. This list could have been much longer than what you saw here today. Some of the feedback that we often get is that from our members when we were first vetting this is that they don't see any sort of head counts in here, wanting to know about numbers of students or folks who took advantage of their services. While we understand that's critical, the research is really not going to show you that head counts are going to be as good as indicators or predictors as the types of measures that you saw here. There were many other indicators, as I mentioned. Just as Becky mentioned earlier, we heard a lot back from our members about soft skills, and they don't see any of the measures there related to some of the soft skills in terms of preparing or succeeding in college, grit, etc. And again, a lot of that was just based on the limited amount of research that was out there, or it may be the limited number of data sources or lack of uniformity in that when you get to soft skills, many programs may be using so many varied things that it just could not, measure up in terms of the data sources or some uniformity being used in a sense across the country to support those particular types of soft skills. Next slide, please. Data sources, as you can imagine from looking at the list you've seen, working with school districts, higher ed institutions, the higher ed agency and the state may have some of this data available, the National Student Clearinghouse that tracks enrollment and degree completion, college access programs, ACT, College Board, self-reported or self-supplied by the students. So there's not going to be a perfect database or a single source where most programs can house all the particular common measures that they may choose to use. Again, we would remind you that we would want them to use this as a framework, that they would pick off the measures that make the most sense, that are related to the services that they provide and what their outcomes and objectives are. Next slide, please. There is a data tool that goes along with this common measure that's available to our NCAN members. It has the ability for our programs to add some customized options to keep them in the tool. The tool can actually produce a dashboard and/or written summaries related to the data. So if you gather your data from a variety of sources, feed it into the tool, you can produce some nice dashboards or written summaries, and that's available to our members in terms of the common measures tool. Next slide, please. I think at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer, and she's going to probably direct some questions our way.
Exactly, and thank you, MorraLee, for a really great presentation and walking us through the development of the NCAN Common Measures tool. And I want to thank the audience first and foremost for all the great questions that have been coming in. Some of them will be addressed in some of our later presentations, but I do want to take a pause and take a couple of them now. First, Becky and MorraLee, at some level, you were talking about student level indicators, and folks wanted to know how you guys are thinking about addressing concerns of confidentiality or tracking of students. I know, MorraLee, you mentioned that these measures are used in the aggregate, but can you talk a little bit about how you see the use of individual student level data?
Well, obviously, many of our college access programs will have participation agreements so that if they're providing services, parents and or students have signed the appropriate kind of information releases, etc., for the programs to use individual student level data to help drive their work and inform their work. But again, as you mentioned, for common measures, this is really looked at the aggregate. And so while student level data is probably going to be used often internally to identify students that may need particular enhancement of services and things like that, common measures would be looked at the aggregate level and hopefully used to inform your overall work in your organization.
Great. And Becky, did you want to add to that?
Well, the CCRS Center works with states who, of course, work with districts and schools. And the work that we've done in terms of reviewing research and, work of the National High School Center to develop early warning systems work, that has been really to support states, districts, and schools and classrooms to use the data in order to, make good decisions. And so, those data are, certainly individual level kid data, but used, at a building and or district level. And certainly the kind of higher you go up, the more aggregation that you see.
Great, thanks. And so there's been lots of questions about these ideas of these soft skills or these other factors. And Becky, I'm wondering if you can start out and talk a little bit about sort of what are the things that fall into those categories, and then maybe a little bit about where the qualities of those measures or even assessments are and where you think that will be going, as we mentioned that we've deemed that those will be really important indicators and predictors perhaps moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, for the work that we did in the brief, we really reviewed, typically almost always kind of peer-reviewed journal articles, and certainly reports and other pieces as well. And there are certainly a number of, different types of instruments that, folks have developed and kind of they use in their own research. It's very different than, say, all the research that's being done, for example, looking at absenteeism with early warning signals work, or having an instrument like, ACT, Plan Explorer, et cetera. And so what we typically find for some of the softer skills are maybe an instrument someone has created and they use in their research, or a couple of different instruments that are sort of used a little bit here and there, but there really hasn't been, sort of a consistency in terms of an instrument developed and kind of used over time in multiple settings. So on the one hand, we don't have that, or have that to certainly the same degree as these other assessments. I don't know whether or not that's a problem or an issue. I mean, me as a researcher, I'd love to see more of that so that we can kind of get, I guess, measures that, I personally feel are kind of more reliable and valid and are used across multiple populations. But certainly at sort of a local level, I think, identifying folks who have created, different types of instruments to look at social emotional learning or cooperative learning or grit or something, and actually kind of taking and using that and collecting your own data. What can you learn from it? What are you not learning from it? And really being able to use that. I think that would be equally valuable to, these larger studies where we can get kind of the reliability and validity kind of worked out at a kind of a broader level.
Great, thanks. And MorraLee, there's been lots of questions about how you mentioned a variety of different data sources and the data collection happening across all of these entities. Can you talk a little bit about how you see building the capacity for that data collection, perhaps previewing a little bit about what your colleague Bill will be talking about, and then also talking about whether or not you see the common measures being used beyond the program level, perhaps at the regional level or even at the state level.
Okay. Certainly. The capacity for data collection, you will hear Bill talk about, and we all understand this. Different programs, different districts, different states' ability to gather and collect and analyze data. The capacity is just critical. What we hope is that through data sharing agreements, contracts with places like the National Student Clearinghouse, it would be ideal if there were one data source, but it will take some capacity. Hopefully, if your program was established and is serving a particular either school district or school districts within a geographic area, you did some initial groundwork about data sharing back and forth between the district and your program. State agencies are getting better and better about making data available down to the district, and building level. And so it will take work. I wish I could say that this is an easy path to gathering all this data, but it is work, and capacity is tough to be able to do that. Some of our larger programs will have some data staff. Others, the executive director is the fundraiser and the data person, and so those certainly create some challenges. In terms of this having a broader use in terms of a dashboard, I really do think it could be. I think we've got some very detailed level measures in there that probably would not be as applicable once you begin to broaden it and take a look at a regional level or a state level, or even large, in some cases, large school district levels, etc. But I think we look at common measures as a framework. And so I think if anybody wants to develop a community dashboard, a regional dashboard, a state dashboard, it would be taking a look at the suggested common measures, identifying which ones would be critical for your particular region, area, state. What are the good solid data sources that you have for those. And so we do really think it can have some broad applicability, and take it and customize it. And we think that's the important part. Use what parts of this work for the region, district, state program that you want to apply it to.
Great, thanks so much for sharing, and keep those questions coming in. And I know folks have some really great questions, which we will get to at the end. But right now, I want to continue on and welcome Bill to address the work that NCAN has done in their Common Measures learning community. Bill?
Hi there. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone here today. You all heard MorraLee talk about NCAN's common measures in a broader kind of sense, and so now I'd like to talk with you all a bit more about how these metrics are being put to use. In my role here at NCAN as a program analyst, I oversee something that we call our Common Measures Learning Community. That's the CMLC. So if you hear me say CMLC over the course of my presentation, this is what I'm talking about. Our group of 20 NCAN members who are actually quite diverse in what they look like in terms of programming, geography, size, program history in terms of longevity. But what unites these programs is the commitment to using data, and specifically the common measures, to improve program performance and scale program capacity. So at the end of this 3-year learning community project, we anticipate that our participating programs will increase their students' college enrollment rates by 7 percentage points and their students' post-secondary graduation rates by 5 percentage points. So how do we accomplish these goals through the CMLC? NCAN is providing technical assistance, resources through webinars, our actual conference, spring training, and we also maintain a resource library on our virtual platform that lets CMLC members ask each other questions, sort through problems, keep track of goals, and continue the development of the work surrounding the common measures. Next slide, please. Let me talk a little bit about how the common measures are being used in the field. With the diversity of the NCAN membership, it's hard to understand in a systematic way what the take-up rate of using these metrics are. But when you think about the fact that NCAN members are in the college access and success field, you have to suspect that at a minimum, these programs are tracking either college enrollment, which is the key access metric, as MorraLee said, or college completion, the key success metric, or both of these two statistics. And preliminary results from a survey on data usage that we conducted show that respondents, by and large, are at least somewhat familiar with the common measures. And nearly 80% of respondents are collecting both enrollment and completion data. Now, specific metrics tracked by each program are, of course, going to vary from organization to organization and program to program. If you're not providing success services once students are enrolled in college, it's unlikely, for example, that you're going to have the data or the need to collect the indicators on the success side. We have some programs that are collecting 12, 13, or even all 14 of our essential indicators. But then on the other side, we also have some that are collecting only 1 or 2. Now, for this latter group, we encourage them to take a look at what their student outcomes, whether their student outcomes could be improved if they expanded it into a new metric, because that would indicate a new program focus or service being provided where one wasn't before. And next slide, please. So how are programs using the common measures? Well, let me give you 2 specific examples that I have seen in the field. First is from an urban school district facing, unfortunately, a lot of the attainment gaps that we see in similar districts across the country. And so in an effort to close some of these attainment gaps on the post-secondary side, the district has created a post-secondary indicators dashboard that is aligned with NCAN's common measures. Now, the district's data system feeds into this dashboard and tracks data longitudinally. And so this is a district with a significant collective impact effort going on as well. And so having that data there longitudinally, school by school, broken out by different student subgroups, that data is really key for that collective impact effort because it gives stakeholders a consistent sense of where strengths and weaknesses are both at the district and school levels. Having that centralized district dashboard also hopefully will make individual schools more data cognizant and aware of post-secondary metrics that extend beyond the purely academic. My next example, and this is something that MorraLee touched on, is that the common measures, because they are research-backed, just like the Predictors of Postsecondary Success report, is that these metrics can drive conversations between NCAN members and their community partners. NCAN members may not have access to all the data they want or need to be tracking to really understand how well they're serving their students. And so we have a lot of programs both in the CMLC and the general NCAN membership working on data sharing agreements. Now, whether these are formal or informal, to be sharing data between programs and school districts or programs in the higher ed institutions where their students matriculate, or programs and other access success programs in the area, it's just good to see these connections being formed and that data being shared because ultimately, I think it really will improve program performance. Go to the next slide, please. Beyond these specific impacts that I mentioned, let's talk about some broader impacts in the field as a result of the common measures. And I would say that one of the largest broad impacts is that this has changed a lot of programs' thinking from being input-based to shifting to think more about outputs and outcomes. So an inputs-based model is collecting metrics like how many students are coming to study sessions, how many SAT prep classes is a program hosting, how many hours per student are counselors investing. And these are really helpful metrics, but they don't tell a complete story in terms of program performance. And so remember, when we talk about program performance, we're talking about how well we're serving the students in our programs, which is something where we need to keep in mind always. So from where I sit, this shift toward concentrating on outcomes rather than solely inputs, which is where a lot of programs have historically, is a really positive move. I suspect a number of folks on this call are familiar with No Child Left Behind, and now folks have a pretty varied feelings on NCLB, but one element of that that is pretty widely lauded is its focus on disaggregation of reporting and results. This is something that MorraLee touched on. But NCAN's common measures call for disaggregation and data collection along vectors like gender, race, ethnicity, economic hardship, ELL status, first-generation status. And when programs can look at performance and see gaps, they can create targeted interventions. So let me give you a concrete example. I was on a site visit a few months ago and heard from a program that saw year over year its enrollments for its college enrollments for Hispanic males had decreased. Now, because that program could see that change, they could dig into their data and say, okay, is there something we did differently with our Hispanic males in this cohort? Did we not deliver the same frequency or intensity of services? Did this group have different academic or family challenges than the previous cohort? And then once these questions were looked at, the program could then say, okay, so we know that we have a lapse here in program performance, and we need to redouble our efforts and target this group in particular to get this group back up to our program standard. Now, there are a lot of different reasons that something like this can happen. Maybe the services provided aren't appealing to these students in particular, and then you can reach out to them and ask, what would be more appealing and tailor your services to be a little bit more effective. And that's what a program gains when it disaggregates data, because without that subgroup analysis, that attainment gap might well have been buried in the overall cohort performance, and a program would have never known about it and never thought to try to improve it. We'll go to our next slide, please. Another impact I want to touch on briefly is the impact that tracking the common measures has or can have on funder relationships. So funders, are important, obviously. We all want to keep them happy. And more funders are interested in seeing good performance data from the programs they're funding. And in fact, I hear a lot in the field that funders are the #1 driver of data collection, management, and reporting. And in the survey we just completed, funders were far and away the group that data are most often shared with. So that's a glass half full. And so programs that are tracking the common measures and thinking critically about the data they're tracking, that demonstrates that a program is purposeful about what they're trying to do, which tends to make for happy funders, and happy funders tend to make for happy programs. So knowing which metrics comprise good program data is what the common measures add here for our members in the college access field. Finally, we have a lot of NCAN members who are using Excel or even paper worksheets to keep track of their data. And there are a lot of programs out there that can assist programs in managing and analyzing and reporting their data. So the common measures are really handy for programs trying to increase their data tracking, because it gives programs an idea of where to start, what metrics are important to have on that back end. This is especially true in using common measures because when you use these metrics, you know that you're going to have something comparable to compare against your peers. That gets a little bit tricky when we talk about how programs are defining their metrics, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Go to the next slide, please. Let me close out here with some lessons learned in my travels to NCAN member sites and talking with them about data and the common measures. First, possession of data is not enough. Programs need to know how to use their data. They need to have a culture that wants to use that data, and there needs to be a commitment to integrating data into the very fabric of the program. Collecting data and storing it in a worksheet and never looking at it is not likely going to improve program performance. It's not going to give you the kinds of revelations that working closely with data can offer. And so we're working on providing technical assistance now on how to develop that data-driven culture. It's something that we've blogged about here at NCAN and will no doubt continue to do in the future. And the next lesson would be that it's okay to start small. You know, it's very rare that you develop a great data system overnight. When I was in Milwaukee a couple months ago, I spoke with someone there who gave me this great way of looking at data collection, and she encouraged she encourages folks to go cyclical and deeper with their data. So start with the data that you have, that you trust, and that you can readily get, and slowly expand from there. So year after year, keep collecting what you have been, and then see how you can slowly branch out and dig a little bit deeper into your data to expand your repertoire there. In doing this and slowly broadening your data capacity, you may also gain partners who want to share data with you, or just use your data to help improve their own program and get more insight into how they can improve their own data collection. We'll go to the next slide, please. I mentioned a few minutes ago that you know, we want to have some comparability with the common measures so that programs can compare themselves to each other a little bit and find resources on how to improve their performance. The metrics are common, but these aren't always comparable depending on how programs are defining things in their system. So let me give you an example. We have persistence as one of the essential indicators, but there's a lot of different ways to measure persistence. You can go fall to fall. You can go fall to spring. I've even seen fall to second spring. You know, not all programs collect that the same way. Some collect it in all three different varieties there. There's a lot of questions sometimes about what students should count in a numerator and a denominator in terms of students being served by a program. So we're working on developing guidelines that are a little more specific around these indicators through a working group in the Common Measures learning community. So stay tuned because there is more coming on this front. The last lesson is that context is key. We have a member program who just the nature of their program is such that students come to them after they have already been accepted to college, and so this program provides last dollar scholarships for students to close that gap so that they can make it to college. So if you look at the common measures for this program, you're going to see that this program always has a 100% enrollment rate for college. Now, if you didn't know anything about the model for this program, you would say they're just knocking it out of the park, and they are. But the nature of their program is such that they will never be less than 100% in college enrollment because it's a prerequisite to getting involved with their program. So I guess something to keep in mind is that it's always important to have that program context. Data is important, but understanding the specific context on the ground, the mission and scope of an organization, understanding the students it serves, the challenges it faces, and the resources it has are all also really important parts of the puzzle. So with that, I'm going to yield the floor back. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Bill. That was a really great presentation, and it sounds like you guys have really learned a lot and really given our audience a lot to think about. Right now, I'm going to transition to our final speaker, June Giddings, with Gulf Coast Partners Achieving Student Success. So June, go ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for this opportunity to share our experience using the common measurements and the data tool. I'm not seeing my slides here. There we go. Go ahead and go to the next one. Thank you. So as the grant coordinator of the Gulf Coast Partners Achieving Academic Success, this is a 3-year, $10 million locally funded grant, and this grant encompasses the greater Houston area consisting of both urban and rural school districts. So basically we had 8 of our community colleges in the Houston area to select 1 or 2 of their ISDs within their service area. Next slide. With the intent of the grant to focus on 3 areas: college readiness, college transition, and college success. We were looking to ensure that our students were graduating college ready and entering into post-secondary, being able to take their credit-bearing courses. Those that needed to go into DevEd, make sure that they were able to quickly transition between the courses into the credit-bearing classes. So as the grant was initially written, the data that our funder was looking at was essentially just the graduation data, the number of students that graduated, how many matriculated in post-secondary, how many went into college ready classes versus DevEd classes, which all was great. However, our funder then came back to say, hey, of all of that information and all of the interventions that you're doing, how do we know what's successful? How are we actually spending that $10 million? So we needed to kind of look at how could we better gauge the success of the interventions at our school district level. And when I say interventions, basically I'm looking at what were the activities and the programs to help promote our students to be college ready. So here comes in comes MorraLee and NCAN and Introduction to Common Measures. So as MorraLee described the common measures, the different elements of there, realized this was a really good fit for Gulf Coast Pass and being able to measure the data that we were already doing. But one of the issues that we had was how can we collect this data in an easy way? And at this point in time, we basically had a 3-week turnaround period that I needed to collect data from our districts to provide as a supplemental report to our funder. So looking at the common measures form, we found that it was easy to understand and that there was already potential data sources given to help our districts to be able to start looking at that information. Go to the next slide, please. So overall, upon introduction of the tool to our ISDs, a little bit of hesitation, but that soon turned to, wow, this is a really great tool. Particularly what the strong feedback was from our funder when, after the 2.5 years of looking at the interventions and programs that were put into place, the data then showed that there was definitely increases in number of students that were graduating college ready and that the work that we were doing was being successful. Some other comments was really around, I think, what Bill was talking about in regards to the data point, the question asking what data is important to the district, to our counselors, et cetera. And we know that good data, we know what good data is to collect, but sometimes our higher-ups don't always know that it exists. But while the comments were positive and the outcome was really good, along the way we did present some challenges. The next slide. So as we looked at the challenges in using this, and I want to frame that in respect to the ISDs being given a tool, given with a short amount of time to figure out how can they find this data. So one of the first questions that I was getting phone calls on was defining the indicators. While the common measures form is pretty explicit and very descriptive, this comes about more of internally within each district, possibly campus to campus or just between individuals within a district. How are they defining some of the indicators? For example, percent of students that are on track to graduate or on track to complete a rigorous college prep curriculum. Now that seems to sound like it'd be pretty simple to find, but what we did find out was that if the district didn't have a master course selection guide and each campus had their own, classes could be coded differently. And as a result, it may show variances in the number of students that may have been in that rigorous college prep class. Another problem may have been around the data that was being collected from College Board. As we know, the data that you get for SAT and AP doesn't have student ID, which means a person would have to go in and scrub the data to then determine which students, what the scores were, and to be able to actually match that data. Another question that came up is, where do I find the data? Large districts may have data or research and assessment departments that may collect all that data, but we found even if they do, sometimes not all of the data would lie there. Sometimes counselors may be collecting it, or administrators, or maybe somebody in federal and state compliance, or maybe a grant department. So the person being asked to then collect this, to complete the form, may have spent a number of hours or days even trying to find this data. Then comes the question of who completes the report. A lot of let's pass it over to the grants person or to a counselor or to somebody. And the good thing about using the data tool was that it was very user-friendly, even for those that didn't have a data and assessment background in using to collect, to be able to complete forms. They found it pretty easy. It was an Excel document, plug in the numbers, and we were good to go. The problem was getting the numbers to put in there. But once we were able to discern who was going to complete those reports and then how to find the data, then it became pretty simple as far as entering the information. The next question came about is like, what are we going to do with the data now? So for grant purposes, we were able to use it, as I said, as a supplementary report. But also, this posed questions back to the district. Now, what will they use this data to go forward? And most of our districts are going to be continuing to collect this information to create their own internal document and internal reporting system. For many of the districts, what they ended up finding was that there were cracks within their data collections internally. They may have had an SIS system or maybe use an external third-party program like a Navient or a Career Cruising, et cetera, to maybe collect some of the data, but not all the data, but also find a better way internally to create the systems to be able to collect the data efficiently and effectively, but also with defining the parameters around what data points that they were going to collect and of who they were going to collect the data for, hopefully for all students, but possibly for grant purposes may have been for smaller cohorts of students. So while there were plenty of challenges that were presented, as I said, the outcome was very positive. Being able to use the data tool and to see the graphics was just really astonishing for the districts to really be able to then say, okay, what we are doing really does matter and that it does work, but also for them to easily assess where they needed to do the work. So going forward, we focused only on the page 1, which is the access outcome, and going into phase 2, we'll be incorporating work from our community colleges to then complete the second page of the common measures, which is the success outcomes. So we hope by the end of this grant period that we'll be able to then collect data from both the ISD and the community college to have a really comprehensive report and idea of what are the positive interventions that are really working to help increase the number of our students that are college ready and going on and graduating on time. And with that, I'll yield back to you, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, June. We really appreciate you providing an on-the-ground use of common measures and what your challenges and successes have been. And we definitely will continue to follow you as you continue to build the capacity within the partners in this project. So I do want to pause right here and take a couple of questions just for you and Bill, and then we'll open it up to the remainder of the panelists. Folks have been really interested in particular about ways in which programs or even in the greater Houston area, you've been doing this in terms of looking at special populations. Bill, you mentioned in particular the example with Hispanic males. I'm wondering if you could talk about if programs have looked at students with disabilities or perhaps students in the foster care system or the juvenile justice system as other special populations that have been considered in this work. Bill, why don't you take that first? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Okay, Bill.
These other special populations are definitely going to vary from program to program, depending on what the population served is. I have not seen too many programs with large foster populations. But let me give you a specific example that I saw a few months ago of a program that did a really good job of breaking down kind of a student's individual profile in so that it could be captured in a couple of different ways. So I've seen programs before kind of track what the family status is of of a child, whether whether there's a single parent household or a two-parent household, or if the child lives with an aunt or a grandmother, whether the child has an IEP or is a foster child, and having all those characteristics in any given student profile is a really good best practice, but it does take a program commitment to doing that kind of data entry and asking those kinds of questions from each student. So I don't have as concrete an example as I guess I would like to have for you here, but it's certainly something that our members are variously working on, and I certainly will be on the lookout for more best practices in the future around this area.
Thanks. And June, do you also want to respond to that question?
Well, I think within GC Pass, we haven't drilled it down into specific populations, but we were looking at a district level to collect the data, but then also to go to campus. So particularly those with multiple campuses, there could be a huge variance in those numbers. But I definitely could see using this very specifically with some of those other populations very simply.
Great, thanks. And right now I'm going to open it up to questions from all of our presenters and start with this one, which I'd like everyone to respond to. And perhaps, MorraLee, you can take this one first. But folks are really focused on when you talk about success, what's the ultimate indicator that you're talking about? Are we talking about degree attainment, career success, or all of the above?
Yes, we are talking about degree attainment. When you have the actual document at the top, our ultimate outcome for access is post-secondary enrollment. Ultimate outcome for success is degree attainment.
Great, and I know in the Predictors of Postsecondary Success brief that they also look beyond and look at some longer-term outcomes in terms of career success as well. There's been lots of questions around building the capacity for data sharing. So June, I'm wondering if you can take this question first and just talk a little bit about how you've built that capacity with your ISDs, your school districts, and some of your community college partners, and then perhaps ask Bill to share an example as well.
So I was lucky to, because of the grant, that step one was we established data agreements between the ISDs and the community college, as well as to our partners within that are overseeing the grant. So by having that data agreement, that really just eased the, being able to share the student level data between the two institutions, which is really a very important piece as we're looking at following the students and tracking them from going from the ISD graduating into the community colleges.
Thanks. And Bill, do you want to share an example of the capacity to share data?
Sure. So like I mentioned during the presentation, within the CMLC, with these 20 programs, we've seen 3 or 4 different configurations of building capacity for data sharing, and a lot of that is somewhat idiosyncratic depending on what the needs of the organizations themselves are. But we've had statewide college access networks sharing data with kind of its subsidiaries across the state, which has really helped to build a data culture in that state. We've had state higher ed offices working specifically with programs to help them with, for example, National Student Clearinghouse data runs. And then, the most common, I think, that you're going to see cross country is kind of the organization to school district data sharing. That can be tricky, but I think that ultimately it's just a matter of demonstrating where the value is for both parties. If an NCAN member can say to a school district, these are the outcomes that we can expect to improve if we can just sign this agreement to get some data out of your central office, you know, we've seen capacity really get increased a lot with the programs who have been able to make that happen.
Thanks so much. And I know there's lots of other questions, but I want to be mindful of our time. And so at this point, I am going to let our audience know that for questions that we were unable to answer today, we are going to connect you with some of the presenters and perhaps respond to some of them on the CCRS Center blog. I also want to announce that the CCRS Center has recently updated their College and Career Readiness and Success Organizer, a great tool for really helping to understand and define what does it mean to be successful in both college, to be ready and successful in college and careers, which is a good theoretical and conceptual framework to really think about these common measures. And then, of course, I also want to announce the next webinar in this series of Predictors of Postsecondary Success. Understanding the value of workforce data in driving student success. You can register for our next webinar either at www.ccrscenter.org, at ccrs.org, or www.aypf.org. I want to thank our presenters today, Becky, MorraLee, Bill, and June, for their excellent presentation, and I also want to thank our audience for your really excellent questions. As you exit the webinar, you'll be asked to fill out a short survey, and we hope that you'll take the time to provide us with these measures of our success as well. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.